Okay, so I'd just like to make a quick video here in reference to David Cameron's trade delegation to China. I believe he's still there at the moment. This is the largest British trade delegation ever to China, so it's quite a significant story. Cameron's got a big job on his hands, trying to persuade the world's second biggest economy that Britain is a place to invest in, and that basically a lot of this is about the Anglo-Sino relationship, which in recent years has at times been tense. Last year David Cameron met the Dalai Lama. That caused a lot of controversy with Beijing, and likewise we have always had issues with China over issues like human rights. So there's always, with meetings between West and East, specifically I should say between London and Beijing, there is always going to be some issues brought up that are controversial. On this occasion though, David Cameron has said Britain's ethical policy on China is effectively off the table. There's been no discussion of Tibet, and the ethical policy is off the table. Now, I've seen contradictory reports on this, because on Cameron's own Facebook website, Facebook page I should say, it says that he'll be discussing having human rights dialogue with Li Keqiang in coming months. Insofar as the position the leaders are taking here, I would say this: of course it's very important to show mutual respect, to have mutual understanding, and the sort of things they're talking about is important. I want good relations with China. I think a country like Britain should have good relations with China. But when Cameron says that we are going to become the biggest cheerleader for China in the Western world, I'm not quite sure what to think. Because the real risk here is that we'll just end up subservient, on the grounds that we'll constantly be holding back from voicing our values on issues like human rights. Now, it has to be said, in recent weeks China's made major reforms, possibly the biggest reforms since 1978. That's no trivial matter, and it's something that the Xi administration should be commended on. The one-child policy has been greatly relaxed. They've announced an end to forced unpaid labour, i.e. the re-education through work issue, which, by the way, in Britain we aren't really much better with that when you consider we have forced unpaid labour in the UK. But it is obvious that Xi is a reformer, and he's made this clear in recent weeks. He's probably done more in recent weeks than Hu Jintao done in 10 years. So his administration should be credited with that. It should be welcomed. But that doesn't mean that there aren't serious issues ongoing in China. There are still severe human rights violations in that country. China still leads the world statistics for capital punishment. There are still people punished and arrested simply for having an opinion. Falun Gong continues to be brutally persecuted. And whatever you think of that organisation, if you're Chinese and you think it's a cult, fair enough, but two wrongs don't make a right, as we say in English. That still doesn't justify the torture used against them. So there are some very grave issues that are ongoing, and the idea that we will never mention these just out of politeness to our hosts makes me uncomfortable. We must never ever sell our values for the sole purpose of trade. It is important to be respectful to China, but we must never ever become subservient. If we're in a situation where we just act as cheerleaders, where we never raise tough questions, where we just do what they say in terms of go along with the Communist Party line on things, that is definitely a recipe for becoming subservient, and that must never be allowed to happen. In my opinion, collective Chinese governments, and by governments I mean administrations, have been incredibly arrogant in their attitude to the world. What I mean by that is they have taken this attitude that sovereignty gives us the right to do whatever we want. including breaking international law on human rights, notably freedom of expression. This is often a situation it was the same in Sri Lanka recently, and actually people have compared those two visits, whereby Cameron was very vocal in his criticism of Colombo, and not so much, well, not at all, on this visit to Beijing. So people are accusing Cameron of hypocrisy. Obviously it's a different situation. China's a lot more powerful than Sri Lanka. But should that mean that we are not consistent with our values? I'm not sure about that. I'm not saying Cameron should go in there and act holier than thou and make it the main focus of his visit. Obviously he's going for trade reasons, and along with George Osborne they have worked hard to try and encourage Chinese visitors to Britain. But we also have to expect some things from China. This has to be worked both ways. They cannot simply ask mutual respect from us and not be prepared to show it themselves. And in my opinion that means accepting that there are times when we will have disagreements on these sort of issues. They cannot simply dismiss this as interfering in domestic affairs. I mean, the Chinese have raised issues about visa restrictions for Chinese students in the UK, and we never said that was part of our internal affairs. So in my opinion we have every right to raise issues that we are concerned about. And there is a profound arrogance from Beijing, that this idea that they're somehow the only country in the world that shouldn't be criticised. I do think it's incredibly arrogant. So in conclusion, I think David Cameron should be diplomatic, polite, respectful, but the idea that we don't raise these issues at all, ever, which is the idea he seemed to be putting out the other day, is unsettling, frankly. He seems to be contradicting that now on the Facebook page. Of course it could be the media misinterpreting what Cameron said, I don't know, but whatever the case, we must never ever become subservient to China, and we shouldn't act as a cheerleader for a country that still is guilty of severe human rights violations. We should never act as a cheerleader. Respect, yes, and that also means looking in the mirror and dealing with our own moral faults, of which the Cameron administration is guilty of, frankly, some human rights abuses in Britain. We're not perfect. But mutual respect should also mean mutual openness, and the Chinese side should accept that they're not above criticism, they're not above international law. I'll leave it there. That's really all I have to say.